Hello, good morning, good evening, all of you. So today uh, we are taking an opportunity to explore how does AWS VPC flow logs look like. So we will be ingesting some of the static data set for AWS VPC flow logs into our Splunk environment, and we will try to make sense of the AWS VPC flow logs. So without any delay, I will be moving back to the console. So just give me a sec. So before I jump on to the our Splunk environment, so this is how does the source type look like, and uh, I'm basically indexing a JSON parsed or JSON formatted data. So there might be a very small or minuscule difference you might you may come across. So anyhow, so in the screen you can see that so today we are going to use this particular source type which has already been highlighted on screen for us. So before I jump onto on the queries or making sense of the AWS VPC flow logs, I just wanted to give you a little bit of walkthrough how does the anatomy of a VPC flow log look like, right? So if I scroll down on my screen, so for example, you can see a result, you can see raw. So these are the default fields which are basically getting ingested or recorded in our VPC flow logs when we basically enable VPC flow logs enabled or turned on in our AWS environment, right? So you can see the very first field, it's nothing but the account ID followed by the interface ID and obviously the source IP address, and then the thing which I have highlighted as of now, this is the destination IP address, source port, destination port, and this is protocol, again the number of the packets, bytes, and so this is the starting time and this is the end time. So I would like to jump onto the AWS documentation page, and so in this particular page you can see that so again for the demonstration purpose, that this is the static data set, and the version of VPC flow logs which is being used here is relatively old. So this is what I was talking about. The very first field, you can see that it's the account ID, followed by the interface ID. Then we have seen that source IP address and destination IP address, and followed by source port, destination port, protocol, and obviously the number of the packets and bytes. At last, we do have start time and end time as well. But there are environments or maybe you might get updated to the new version of the VPC flow logs. So I just wanted to give you a glimpse that it has got other fields uh, recorded in this particular data set as well, which wasn't there previously. So the example being VPC ID, subnet ID, instance ID. So that is very, very useful too. And the most important field which is getting recorded in the new version of the VPC flow logs to my mind is the flow direction, right? So which wasn't there, or which is in fact not there, the environment which we are going to use, flow direction, right? So which is going to basically determine whether the traffic is flowing inbound or is going outbound to the world, right, from our environment, right? So yeah, so this is just, I want to give you a little bit of the walkthrough how does the anatomy of VPC flow logs look like. Now moving on, now we have already seen that, so you can see all the default fields which we could see in this particular logs as of now, right? So in the raw logs we have already get a little bit familiar with that. You can see so some of the fields will be very, very important, and we will be making the use of those particular fields. So just give me a sec. So if I go back to here, so as I suggested that, right, so we might be interested in knowing what is the traffic which might be going outbound from our environment, right? So I will be making the use of this particular query which I have devised so far, and will be going back to our Splunk environment, and I will be pasting that. I have selected the range because I mentioned that again this is the static data set, pre-recorded data set, and so you can see in the second line I have explicitly mentioned that the destination IP should not be the internal private IP address range, right? So we would definitely would like to eliminate noise or cancel noise, and then I would like to export some of the fields which you can see in our stats query, right? So for example, I will be interested in what are the source IP addresses, what are the destination ports. So without any delay, we would like to see how does the result look like. So having said that, if you have already gotten upgraded to the latest version of the VPC flow logs, it might help you already that whether you are seeing the traffic in the inbound and outbound direction. But yes, you need to get a little bit of the understanding how does the data look like in your environment and how to make the sense of that, right? So these are some of the fields I think will be important from our standpoint, and therefore so this is just a basic how does the traffic which might be going outbound from your AWS environment. So this is the very first query which I would like to demonstrate, and now I will be moving to the new query, which is if for example so this particular query, the second query, the traffic in the inbound direction, might be very very helpful. So for example, if you have already got a guard duty turned on in your environment, right, and you have come across any such findings, uh, let's say your environment or your EC2 instance is getting scanned from the external IP addresses, something of that sort, right? So we would definitely like to make the use of VPC flow logs just to make sure the traffic which guard duty has flagged out in the respective finding, whether that kind of the traffic is accepted or rejected in our environment, right? So that will be of significant value, or that will be the very first step how we triage that kind of the incident, right? So this is the just the basic demonstration. So for example, just wanted to give you a little bit of glimpse. So what is the traffic that might be flowing inbound? So again, I explicitly mentioned the source type. You can see this is VPC flow logs, and we are also looking at the traffic which is blocked in our environment. Again, so again, so we only would like to list the traffic or export the results uh, in the Splunk, which is originating from the external IP address. So that is what we have mentioned in the second line, and in the third line we are basically making the use of the stats command, and in the fourth line we are just sorting the results, just to make sure that in the sort the result in the reverse order. So can you see, so for example, this is the external IP address, which is sending or trying to establish a connection to the internal IP addresses. We already saw that traffic is blocked and some of the destination ports, which you can see listed here, right? If I can scroll down, you can see again the external IP address, the traffic is blocked from this IP address, and again, you can see some of the destination ports like NTP, SNMP, DNS. So since there are multiple ports which the external IP is trying to establish connection on, uh, could be indicating that this external IP might be a malicious IP which is trying to scan your open ports in your AWS environment, right? So something of that sort. So hopefully these kind of the queries might be giving you little bit of the familiarity. How does a VPC flow logs look like, and how you can get started in making sense of these VPC flow logs, which might already be getting ingested in your Splunk environment or enterprise environment, right? So apart from that, I will be moving on. So so in the third case, so let's say I was telling you that, let's say if you have come across a scenario that your guard duty has flagged that, one of the external IP addresses is scanning one of your EC2 instances. And in that particular finding, we already have some of the informations. For example, what is the AWS account in which we have guard duty has flagged this particular finding, and we also have the internal IP address or the EC2 instance ID, and we also have the target host which is trying to establish a connection from our internal host, right? So we have some information, so let's try to make use of that. So for example, I will be making the note of the external IP address which is trying to scan our environment. So result IP is equal to let's say, so this is the external IP address, and I also have some other information available. So dest is equal to, so I will be copying my, then I also have the information what is the AWS account ID. So let's try to search what we can find it here, right? So we have some of the events now, right? So for example, the most important thing for us is if the guard duty has flagged some finding in our environment, we would like to know whether this kind of the traffic is getting accepted or rejected, right? So if it is getting accepted, we might need to take subsequent remedial actions, which I will be giving you a glimpse of in a bit. But if the traffic is getting rejected, so again, that is good for us. The traffic is not really making into our environment. It might be getting rejected at the web application firewall level, uh, or and then, from the remediation perspective, if the traffic is getting accepted, you might want to look at your web application firewalls. So you can explicitly state if you have identified or determined the external IP address which might be malicious. You might want to look at the reputation of that particular IP address in many of the whois lookup sites, and if you get to know that the IP address is malicious, you can put explicit block in your web application firewall if that is already implemented in your environment. You can also block the traffic explicitly at the subnet level by making the use of NACLs. Similarly, at the instance level, you should have some kind of the standards that your security group should always be restricted. So there are controls at the WAF level, and at the subnet level and at the instance level as well, right? So depending on the organization and how does the environment look like, you can take the remedial action. But most importantly, I think if you have the WAF, we can that is the best remediation action, that we can put the explicit block at the web application firewall level, right? So that the traffic does not enter in your AWS estate or environment, right? So let's try to do that. Stats count. So I said that we will be interested in the action is very important for us, and let's also result, and let us also taken into consideration the time at which it is happening. So you can see that there are so most of the traffic is getting blocked, but however there are some of the traffic which might be getting accepted. So you might want to investigate, so for it might also happen, so for example, your controls has determined, so for example, we can see here the most of the traffic is blocked, right? So the first two packets, it might be getting accepted, but it is never really making into the your environment, right? So you can investigate that kind of the thing, what is the packet, and so you might want to take subsequent steps whether you are investigating this kind of the thing. So for example, if you get into these kind of the logs, you might have other details as well, right? So for example, you have the instance ID, you will be having the interface ID, you will also be having some other details which is getting logged into these kind of the logs. We'll be moving on to the subsequent query. So for example, if let's say if you are doing some kind of the threat hunting, you just wanted to uh, see how does the traffic, what kind of the traffic you would see from which of the countries you are seeing the traffic is coming inbound, right? So for example, I will be making the use of this particular query. So I'm using the keyword rare or the command rare, so which might which will give me the some of the countries which we have not seen previously, or the percentage will be very very less. So you might want to investigate this kind of the events, because this is not normally we do not see in our environment, and probably we do not do business in these countries for that matter, and therefore would like to investigate further. So probably a good query. So you can see all these countries are listed here. Moving on, so you can also again I would so you can go beyond this particular step, and so for example, you wanted to see whether the action is getting rejected or not, or whether the traffic is getting inbound and making it to which particular destination IPs. So you can see that the destination IP is 172.16 dot something something, right? So we can see that the traffic is getting blocked, so it doesn't really ask for our attention as of now. Also want to let you know, so for example, so we are trying to explore the connection attempts. So we have explicitly given some of the destination ports in this particular query. So we are basically trying to see here whatever the connection attempts that are being made over the period of time, right? So so for example, we have given some of the UDP ports, and so for example, if we are seeing that some of the source, there are many external source IP addresses which are trying to establish a connection within our environment over the period of time. This query might give us some of the good results, which which might be useful from our perspective. So if I go to the visualization, yeah, so because it is again the static data set, I'm just so for example, in the format, if I want to, let's say, yeah, so this is the visualization. So for example, this is basically giving me for example, how many source IP address is trying to establish a connection on this particular port, right? So for example, if I go to the table, you can see that we have mentioned the NTP port, we have mentioned the SNMP port, we have also mentioned the RDP port, DNS port. So we are basically trying to see, so for example, how many unique external IP addresses is trying to establish connection to our to our environment on these particular ports, right? So for example, if you see this particular port, so for example, 123 is the destination port, and you can see that 21 external IPs is trying to establish a connection on this particular port over the period of over the duration of 5 minutes, right? Some really good graphic which might be giving a little bit of the visibility what might be happening in our environment at this point in time. And similarly, you can see if I point it out here again, the NTP port, you can see that 22 different external IPs is trying to establish a connection on this particular port. And similarly, if I point out here So for example, you can see the destination port is 17 and there are 8 source IPs, or 8 number of times 8 is the number of the source IPs or the external IPs which is trying to make the connection here, right? So similarly for this case also, you can see the destination port is 53 DNS port, and you can see the number of external IPs which is trying to establish connection are 9 as of now. So, and we'll be moving on to the another query, right? So that says anomaly detection. So before I do that, I just wanted to give you a little bit of the glimpse what we are looking at here. So again, I mentioned here the action is blocked, because the kind of the data we see in this kind of static data set. And so again, I mentioned that the traffic which is originated from the IPs should be the external IPs in nature. And again, I mentioned that I'm trying to look for the duration of 5 minutes interval, and then I'm basically making the use of stats command. So for example, I'm trying to I'm basically trying to so anomaly detection. So for example, I'm calculating some of the stuff, right? I'm trying to find the average number of the bytes which might be getting inside, or the average number of the bytes which might be getting outside, right? So if what is the if we saw the greater degree of the bytes of the data which might be getting transferred or exfiltrated out, or number of the or the average number of the bytes of the data which might be getting in, if it is more than that of the average over that period of time or over that period of interval, so it might flag me those particular source IP addresses, right? So I'm basically making the use of event stats as a command. You can see I'm trying to calculate the average number of the bytes over the interval of 5 minutes duration, and I'm also trying to calculate the standard deviation. So, and this is nothing but I'm just trying to make a use of the if or else statement. So for example, if the total number of the bytes is greater than that of average number of the bytes plus minus 3 3 times the standard deviation, so that will render the result as true, and therefore it will be giving me those kind of the results, right, which we would be interested in, right? So let me try to click on search. I will be going into the statistics again. So at this point in time, so I can make some kind of a small modification. So for example, at this point in time, we are trying to see the traffic which might be getting blocked in our AWS environment. But if you can remove this particular filter, no issues with that. So you can see that and if you really scroll through this kind of the traffic, you can see that this external IP is trying to make the connection, though the action is blocked, but it's trying to scan these particular ports, the NTP port, the SNMP port. You can see the DNS as well. So it might be giving you a little bit of the picture that it is trying to scan your environment for the open ports, right? So you can again make some of the modifications if you would like, because I think the most important thing you might be interested in, if the traffic is getting allowed from the external IPs, because that is where you would like to take some kind of the remedial action, and you need to act quickly. So obviously you can make those particular things. So for example, you might want to look what these kind of the IP addresses looks like. But however, some of the external IP addresses also belong to the Amazon. So obviously make a check, go to the whois lookup site and try to check what kind of the IP addresses, these IP addresses belong to which particular organization, for that matter. So the results might get changed. So for example, if I can also, at this point in time, I have not really used time here, so our results will get varied. So for example, dot, let's say time, and similarly if I can do like here in the results, so our results might get varied. And so this is some of the queries or some of the scenarios I just wanted to walk you through, so that you get a little bit familiar with the VPC flow logs in your environment. And so I will be putting all those particular queries that might be helpful to you in the video description. So this is the thing I just wanted to cover in the today's demonstrations. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.